Finding home. A gay love story. Part 1 collision. Chapter 1 the breaking point. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed their eternal, sterile song as Dr. James Rivera, 34, stood outside a patient's room with his stethoscope hanging around his neck like a badge of exhaustion. His dark eyes were rimmed with the kind of tired that came from 16-hour shifts, 3 days running. His brown skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his thick black hair, usually kept meticulously groomed, was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles from where he'd run his hands through it countless times. He'd been a resident at St. Mary's Hospital in Los Angeles for 12 years. 12 years of saving lives, losing lives, celebrating victories that lasted only until the next crisis, and absorbing the weight of other people's suffering as if it were his own personal burden. James was good at his job, better than good. He was exceptional, his colleagues said so, his patients trusted him implicitly, but excellence, he'd learned, came with a price. The price was a personal life that had slowly disappeared like ink in water. He checked his watch, 2:47 a.m. In a few hours he'd have to be back, but first he had to make it home. He'd been awake for so long that the world had taken on a dreamlike quality, edges blurred, colors muted. As he walked through the parking garage toward his car, a practical Honda Civic that had seen better days, his phone buzzed. A text from his mother: "Mijo, you work too much. When are you coming to visit? Your tia wants to see you." James sighed and typed back, "Soon, mama, promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He'd been avoiding his family's house in East LA for months, not because he didn't love them, he did fiercely, but because his mother had taken to asking increasingly pointed questions about his personal life. When was he going to settle down? Had he met anyone nice? She knew he was gay. He'd come out to his family years ago, and they'd been accepting in that complicated way that Latin families were, supportive but also relentlessly focused on the absence of a partner. His mother didn't understand that he didn't have time for love. Love required attention, presence, vulnerability. James had devoted all those capacities to his work. As he drove through the empty Los Angeles streets toward his apartment in Silver Lake, he thought about the patient he'd lost tonight. A man only 58 years old admitted with a massive heart attack. James had done everything right, the protocols, the medications, the interventions, but the heart had simply given up. Sometimes bodies just decided they were done, regardless of what medicine had to offer. It was one of the hardest lessons medicine had taught him. You couldn't save everyone, and sometimes, despite your best efforts, someone would slip away anyway. By the time James reached his apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a converted Victorian, it was nearly 4 a.m. He went through his usual routine on autopilot: shower, clean clothes, black coffee that tasted like ash. Then he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing he should sleep but unable to quiet his mind. He thought about the patient's family, the wife gripping her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face, the adult children shocked and confused. He delivered the news with practiced compassion, but he'd seen the devastation in their eyes. He'd seen them recognize in that moment that death could come without warning, without mercy, without regard for whether you'd said goodbye. James had been a doctor long enough to know that life was fragile and precious and fleeting, yet somehow that knowledge hadn't made him live any differently. He still spent 60 hours a week at the hospital. He still canceled plans with friends. He still told himself that love could wait until he had time for it. Maybe tomorrow, he thought, and fell into an exhausted sleep. Chapter 2 the intervention. 3 weeks later, James was sitting in his favorite coffee shop, a hole-in-the-wall place called The Daily Grind that made the best cortados in Silver Lake, when his best friend appeared in front of him like an unwelcome specter. David Torres, 33, had that determined expression on his face that James had learned to recognize and fear. It was the expression David made when he was about to do something James didn't want him to do. "Before you say anything," James started, not looking up from his laptop where he was checking patient files, "the answer is no." "You don't even know what I'm going to say," David said, sitting down without being invited. "You're going to tell me I need to do something social. You're going to remind me that I haven't been on a date in 3 years. You're going to suggest that I'm wasting my prime years working myself into an early grave, which is particularly ironic coming from someone whose best friend is a doctor and should therefore know exactly how an early grave is achieved." David grinned. 3 years, actually I think it's closer to 4. James finally looked up from his laptop, raising an eyebrow. Is that your idea of being supportive? My idea of being supportive is staging an intervention, David said, pulling a flyer out of his pocket and sliding it across the table. Look at this. James picked it up reluctantly. It was an advertisement for a volunteer program, the Community Heart Project based in downtown LA. The organization provided free or reduced-cost cardiac care to uninsured and underinsured patients in the community. I don't have time for volunteer work, James said immediately. Actually, you do, David said. Hear me out, I know the director. They're looking for cardiologists to come in one weekend a month, Saturday mornings. That's it, one Saturday a month. You wouldn't even have to reduce your hospital hours. Why are you doing this? James asked, but he was still looking at the flyer. Because I'm worried about you, David said simply. You're burning out, James, I can see it. Your mom can see it. That's why she called me last week crying about how you never visit anymore. James felt a stab of guilt. She's being dramatic. She's being a mother. Look, I'm not saying you need to quit your job or change your whole life. I'm just saying that you need to find something that reminds you why you became a doctor in the first place. You became a doctor because you wanted to help people, not because you wanted to sacrifice your entire existence on the altar of medicine. James set the flyer down and took a long sip of his cortado. David was right, and he hated it when David was right, which was often. One Saturday a month, James asked. One Saturday a month, David confirmed, and you might actually meet some interesting people, just a thought. I don't need to meet people, David, I'm perfectly content. You're perfectly miserable, David interrupted. Content and miserable are not the same thing. 2 weeks later, James found himself walking into the Community Heart Project clinic on a Saturday morning. He told himself he was only doing this because David wouldn't stop texting him about it. He told himself he'd give it 1 month and then quit. He told himself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. The clinic was in an old converted warehouse in downtown LA, painted a cheerful blue that contrasted sharply with the neighborhood's general state of decay. Inside, it was warm and welcoming. Motivational posters on the walls, comfortable waiting areas, a small kitchen where volunteers were already preparing coffee and snacks for the patients. The director, Margaretchen, 58, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, greeted him warmly. Dr. Rivera, David told me so much about you. I'm so glad you decided to volunteer. Happy to be here, James said, which was only partially true. Margaret showed him around the clinic, introducing him to the small staff and other volunteers. Most of them were nurses or students interested in community health. As Margaret was explaining the day's schedule, the clinic door opened and a man walked in carrying several boxes of supplies. Alex Santos, 32, was tall and lean, with warm brown skin, dark curly hair that was only barely contained by what looked like a futile attempt at a man bun, and the kind of easy confidence that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He wore an old UCLA t-shirt with paint stains on it and jeans that had seen better days, and his smile when he saw Margaret was genuinely warm. Margaret, you would not believe the deals I found at the medical supply warehouse. He stopped mid-sentence when he noticed James. His dark eyes registered surprise, then something that looked like recognition, though James was certain they'd never met. Everyone, this is Alex Santos, Margaret said. He volunteers with us every Saturday. And he also runs an arts program for at-risk youth in the neighborhood. Alex, this is Dr. James Rivera. He's a cardiologist at St. Mary's and will be joining us going forward. Alex set down the boxes and extended his hand. When their palms met, James felt something unexpected, a spark of electricity, a moment of clarity cutting through the fog of exhaustion that had become his default state. Dr. Rivera, Alex said, and his voice was warm and genuine. It's nice to meet you. Just James, he said, and didn't let go of Alex's hand quite as quickly as he probably should have. Margaret watched the exchange with an expression James couldn't quite read, then said, Well, I'll let you two get acquainted. James, I'm going to have you work with Alex this morning. He knows the ropes here and he's excellent at patient relations. You'll learn a lot from him. And then she was gone, leaving James alone with a man who had just disrupted his carefully ordered morning in ways he couldn't quite explain. So, Alex said, picking the boxes back up, have you worked in community health before? No, James admitted, this is actually my first time volunteering here. My friend basically bullied me into it. Alex laughed, a real genuine laugh that made his whole face light up. That's honest, I like that. Well, let me show you how things work around here. Fair warning, it's not quite like working at a fancy hospital. Our patients don't have insurance, which means they usually only come in when something is really wrong. And often they're terrified about what the visit is going to cost them. It's free, James asked. Completely free, Alex confirmed. That's the whole point. Healthcare shouldn't be a luxury. Everyone deserves to have their heart checked out even if they can't afford it. As they worked through the morning, James found himself drawn to Alex in ways he didn't entirely understand. It wasn't just physical attraction, though Alex was undeniably attractive. It was the way Alex spoke to patients with genuine interest and without any hint of judgment. It was the way he remembered details from previous visits, asking about family members by name, inquiring about jobs and lives. When an elderly woman came in worried about chest pain, Alex sat with her for 20 minutes, explaining her symptoms and helping her understand what James was examining. He held her hand during the EKG, made her laugh with stories about his youth program, and by the time she left, she was smiling despite her anxiety. "You're very good with people," James said as they cleaned up between patients. "So are you," Alex replied. "I can see it. You listen carefully, you don't rush, you explain things in a way that makes sense. That's rare in doctors. Most of them are so caught up in the medicine that they forget about the human being on the other side of the stethoscope." "How long have you been volunteering here?" James asked. "About 3 years," Alex said. "I started because I grew up in this neighborhood and I wanted to give back. But honestly, I think it's given me more than I've given. I run an arts program for kids in the area. They teach me way more about life than I could ever teach them about painting." "You're an artist. Is it that obvious?" Alex gestured to his paint-stained shirt. "I'm a muralist mostly. I also do some teaching at a community center. It's not exactly lucrative, but it pays the bills and lets me do work that actually matters." James felt a twinge of something, envy, recognition, at those words. Work that actually matters. Wasn't that what he'd gone into medicine for? Yet somehow, over the years, the bureaucracy and the exhaustion had buried that original impulse beneath layers of survival and habit. When lunch came, Alex invited James to grab food from a taco truck that parked outside the clinic on Saturday mornings. They sat on a bench outside, eating carnitas tacos and drinking horchata, and James found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He told Alex about his job, about the long hours and the emotional toll. He talked about his family and the pressure to maintain their expectations. He talked about the patient he'd lost 3 weeks ago and how it had shaken something loose in him. Alex listened without trying to fix anything, without offering platitudes or false comfort. He just listened, and somehow that was exactly what James needed. "Can I tell you something?" Alex said when James had finished. "You look like someone who's been running for a very long time and just realized that you don't remember why you started running." It was so accurate that James felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back quickly, uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "I don't really know how to stop," James admitted. "Maybe you don't have to stop," Alex said. "Maybe you just have to change direction a little, find the thing that reminds you why you started in the first place." After lunch, as they went back into the clinic, Alex reached out and squeezed James's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight of understanding that James hadn't expected to find from a stranger. By the end of the day, as James was packing up to leave, Alex appeared with a piece of paper in his hand. "My number," Alex said simply. "If you ever want to grab coffee or talk or just need someone to remind you that you're doing good work here, call me." James looked at the number, then at Alex's face. He wanted to say something clever or casual, but instead he just said, "Thank you." "See you next Saturday?" Alex asked. "Yeah," James said, "I think you will." As he drove home, James realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, something felt different, something felt possible. Part 2 Awakening. Chapter 3 Saturday Mornings. The next Saturday came too quickly and not quickly enough. James told himself he was just coming back to the clinic because he'd promised Margaret he would. He definitely wasn't coming back because of Alex. That was a lie. The moment he walked into the clinic and saw Alex already there, organizing supplies and humming to himself, James felt his chest tighten in a way that was both wonderful and terrifying. "You came back," Alex said, smiling when he saw James. "I said I would," James replied, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, but I've learned that a lot of volunteers say they'll come back and then never do. I'm glad you're different." Over the next few weeks, Saturday mornings became the thing James looked forward to most. Not just because of Alex, though that was certainly part of it, but also because of the work itself, because of the way patients' faces changed when they realized they would get care regardless of their ability to pay, because of the tangible difference they were making in people's lives. He started arriving earlier, staying later. He and Alex would drink terrible coffee from the clinic's ancient coffee maker and talk about their lives, their families, their dreams. Alex told James about his murals, how he'd started as a kid, drawing on walls in his neighborhood, and how an art teacher had recognized his talent and encouraged him to channel it productively. James told Alex about the moment he knew he wanted to be a doctor, watching his grandfather have a heart attack at the dinner table and the paramedics saving his life. "So your grandfather is still alive?" Alex asked. "No, he died 5 years ago," James said, "but I got to have him in my life for another 25 years because of that moment. That's why I became a doctor, to give other people more time with their loved ones." Alex reached over and took James's hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. "That's beautiful," Alex said quietly, "and I think you're doing that. I've seen you with patients. You care about them, you see them. That matters more than you know." James looked at their intertwined hands and felt something shift inside him. Something that had been locked away for a long time was beginning to wake up. One Saturday, about a month into their friendship, Alex brought James a gift. It was a small canvas he'd painted, a mural-style image of a doctor and a patient, rendered in bold colors and expressive brushstrokes. But when James looked more closely, he realized the doctor had his face and his characteristic expression of careful concentration. "Alex," James said, touched beyond words, I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Alex said. "I just wanted you to have something that reminds you of why you're here, why you matter." James found himself thinking about that painting constantly over the next week. He hung it in his apartment in a place where he could see it from his bed. Every morning he'd wake up and see Alex's rendering of him, and it would remind him that someone saw him, really saw him, and thought he was worth creating something beautiful about. The following Saturday, as they were packing up at the end of the day, Alex said, "Hey, do you want to come see some of my murals? I mean, if you're not exhausted, I know you probably want to go home and sleep." James didn't even hesitate. "I'd love to." They drove around downtown LA in Alex's ancient Volkswagen van, which Alex had decorated inside with hanging plants, string lights, and what appeared to be at least 50 different air fresheners. Alex drove with one hand on the wheel and the other gesturing as he talked, pointing out different murals they passed. "See that one?" he said, pointing to a massive image of a phoenix rising from flames. "That's one of mine. I did it about 2 years ago, right after I went through a really bad breakup. I needed to express something, and this was what came out." "It's incredible," James said. "I had no idea you were this talented." "It's just painting," Alex said with a shrug, but James could see he was pleased. "Everyone's got something they're good at. Mine just happens to be visible on walls." They pulled up to a neighborhood that was clearly undergoing gentrification, the older buildings being mixed with newer development. Alex parked and led James to an alley where a massive mural covered an entire wall. It depicted a diverse group of people of all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, all coming together in a moment of connection. In the center, there was an image of two men, brown-skinned, beautiful, holding each other in an embrace that was so tender and unself-conscious that James felt tears spring to his eyes. "That's one of my favorites," Alex said quietly. "I painted it about a year ago. It's called Found Family." "It's beautiful," James whispered. "I painted it because I wanted to create something that reminded people that love comes in all forms," Alex said. "That family isn't always the people you're born with. Sometimes it's the people you choose. Sometimes it's a stranger who becomes your person." James turned to look at Alex, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a possibility, a door opening to a future neither of them had quite imagined yet. "Thank you for showing me this," James said softly. "Thank you for coming," Alex replied. I like sharing this with you. As they drove back through the city, Alex reached over and turned down the music. They drove in companionable silence for a while and then Alex said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," James said. "Why haven't you been in a relationship? I mean, from what I know about you, you're smart, kind, compassionate, good-looking. I'm just curious what's kept you from having someone in your life." James considered the question. "I think," he said slowly, "I was afraid that if I let someone in I'd have to give some of myself to them, and I didn't think I had anything to spare. I've been so focused on my career that I didn't know how to exist for anyone else." "Do you think you might know now?" Alex asked, keeping his eyes on the road. James's heart was racing. "Maybe," he said, "I think I'm starting to." Chapter 4, The Confession. For the next 2 weeks, James was a wreck. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus on his work at the hospital. All he could think about was Alex, the way Alex smiled, the way he moved, the way he looked at James like he saw something worth looking at. David noticed immediately. "Oh my God, you're in love," David said one day at lunch. "I am not," James protested. "You absolutely are. You've had that dopey expression on your face for 2 weeks. Your mom called me asking if you were okay because you sound distracted when she talks to you. You're in love." "Even if I were," James said carefully, "it doesn't matter. Alex and I are friends. He doesn't feel that way about me." "How do you know that?" David asked. "Because he hasn't said anything," James said. "James, he took you to see his murals. He gave you a painting of yourself. He asks you about your life and actually listens to the answers. He looks at you like you're the most interesting person he's ever met. Those are not the actions of someone who's just a friend." James wanted to believe David was right, but he was terrified. What if he was wrong? What if he ruined the only good thing in his life right now by asking for something Alex wasn't willing to give? He wrestled with the decision for another week. Finally, on Saturday morning, as he and Alex were setting up the clinic for the day, James made a decision. "I need to talk to you," he said to Alex. "After we're done here, not at work, somewhere private." He could see Alex's expression shift, a mix of concern and something else that James couldn't quite read. "Okay," Alex said carefully, "that sounds serious." "It is," James confirmed. The hours that followed were excruciating. James kept replaying different versions of the conversation in his head. He'd prepared speeches, but he knew he'd probably just ramble. He was a doctor, articulate about medical matters, terrible about everything else. When they finally finished for the day, Alex drove them back to his place, a small converted loft in Arts District that was exactly what James expected. Colorful, bohemian, filled with art and plants and evidence of a life lived with intention and passion. Alex poured them both wine and they sat on his balcony overlooking the Arts District, watching the city lights twinkle to life as the sun set. "So what did you want to talk about?" Alex asked after a long silence. James took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something and I need you to understand that I'm not saying this lightly. I've been thinking about this for weeks and I'm terrified, but I also can't not say it anymore." Alex didn't say anything. He just waited, his warm brown eyes patient and kind. "I have feelings for you," James said finally. "More than friendship feelings, and I know that might be weird or uncomfortable and I value your friendship too much to risk it, but I also know that if I don't say something I'm going to explode. So I'm saying it. I like you, Alex, I like you a lot." The silence that followed felt like an eternity, even though it was probably only a few seconds. Then Alex smiled, slowly, beautifully, like the sun breaking through clouds. "I like you too," Alex said. "I have for weeks, I just wasn't sure if you felt the same way." "You like me?" James asked, needing to confirm. "I like you," Alex confirmed. "I think you're extraordinary and I'm terrified too because friendship is easy and love is hard, but I think you might be worth it." James reached over and took Alex's hand. "I want to kiss you," he said, "but I'm also kind of freaking out right now, so maybe you should just do it before I overthink this." Alex laughed and leaned over and kissed him. It was gentle and tentative at first, both of them nervous and unsure. But then something shifted and the kiss became deeper, more urgent, full of all the feelings they'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Alex rested his forehead against James's. "Hi," Alex said softly. Hi, James replied, smiling despite his racing heart. I think I'm going to want to do that again, Alex said. Please do, James said. And he did. Part 3 coming out. Chapter 5, The Reality. Dating Alex was nothing like James had expected. He'd imagined that having a romantic relationship would feel like an additional obligation, another thing demanding his time and energy. Instead, it felt like liberation. On nights when James came home from the hospital exhausted, Alex was there with dinner he'd made or takeout from their favorite restaurant. He'd listen to James talk about the cases that had been difficult, the patients he'd lost, the small victories that made the job worthwhile. And he wouldn't try to fix anything or offer false comfort, he'd just hold James and let him feel what he needed to feel. Conversely, when Alex had a bad day, when a mural project got rained out, or when one of his youth students was dealing with family issues, James was there with a bottle of wine and a willingness to sit with him in the difficulty. They fell into a rhythm. Saturday mornings at the clinic, which had become a sacred part of both their lives, weeknight dinners when James wasn't working overnight, Sunday mornings in bed reading and drinking coffee and not going anywhere, lazy afternoons with Alex's hands covered in paint and James laughing at him trying to cook with paint in his hair. 3 months into their relationship, Alex asked James to meet his family. Fair warning, Alex said as they drove to his parents' house in East LA, my family is intense. My mom is going to want to feed you about 17 different dishes. My dad is going to ask you 1,000 questions about your intentions with me. My brother is going to make jokes that are probably going to be inappropriate. And my abuela is just going to study you quietly and then pass judgment. No pressure then, James said, but he was smiling. The Santos family home was warm and welcoming, decorated in bright colors and filled with the smell of cooking. Alex's mother, Rosa, immediately pulled James into a hug and started speaking rapid-fire Spanish about how wonderful it was to finally meet Alex's boyfriend. Alex's father, Miguel, shook James's hand firmly and said, "Take care of my son or I will know." Alex's brother, Carlos, grinned and said, "So you're the guy who finally made my brother stop talking about art long enough to think about something else. Thank God." And Abuela, who insisted on being called Abuela Rosa, not Mrs. Santos, studied James carefully while serving him the best tamales he'd ever eaten in his life, then nodded approvingly and said something in rapid Spanish that made the whole family laugh. "What did she say?" James asked Alex. "She said I have good taste," Alex translated, "and that you have kind eyes." By the end of the evening, James felt like he was being adopted into the family, which was both wonderful and slightly overwhelming. As they drove home, Alex took James's hand. "My family loves you," he said. "Your family just met me," James pointed out. "Yeah, but that's how they are. If they don't like someone, they let you know pretty quickly. The fact that my abuela complimented your eyes means you're in. You're basically family now." James felt something warm and solid settle into his chest. Family, he had a boyfriend. He was thinking about the future with someone. Everything was changing, and for once it didn't feel terrifying, it felt right. The next hurdle was telling his own family. James's mother had been calling more frequently lately, and while she hadn't asked directly, he could sense her questions hanging in the air. His father was quieter, but James knew his parents talked. His mother had probably told his father something was different with James. One Sunday afternoon, James drove to his parents' house in East LA, not far from where Alex lived actually, which James found oddly fitting. His mother, Carmen, answered the door with a smile that told James she'd been expecting this conversation. "Mijo, come in, your father is in the backyard, we're having carne asada." Over dinner, surrounded by the comfort of his childhood home and the smell of grilled meat and lime, James told his parents about Alex. He told them about meeting him at the clinic, about how Alex made him feel less alone, about how Alex challenged him to think about what he wanted his life to be. He told them he was in love and he was gay, and he was sorry it had taken him so long to tell them. His father, David, named after a grandfather James had never met, listened quietly. His mother reached over and squeezed James's hand. "We know you're gay, Mijo," his mother said gently. James looked up surprised. "You do?" "Of course we do," his father said, speaking for the first time. You're our son, we know you, we've known for years. We've been waiting for you to feel comfortable telling us, his mother added. And we've been waiting to meet this person who was so important that you were willing to finally share this part of yourself. James felt tears in his eyes. I was so scared you'd be disappointed. Disappointed? His mother said, almost scoffing. Because you're happy, because you found someone to share your life with, the only disappointment I've had is that I haven't met Alex yet. When can he come to dinner? Chapter 6, The Integration. Over the next few months, Alex became a fixture in James's family gatherings. He came to his parents' house for dinner. He joined the family on various occasions. He bonded with James's cousins over his art. He made his mother laugh with stories about his murals. And slowly, the compartments of James's life that had been so carefully separated began to merge. His work friends met Alex. His family met his hospital colleagues. His old life and his new life weren't separate anymore, they were integrated into a coherent whole. But with that integration came questions he hadn't quite expected to face. It happened on a random Tuesday evening. James was at work seeing patients in the cardiac care unit when one of his colleagues, Robert, a cardiovascular surgeon who'd been at St. Mary's almost as long as James, stopped him in the hallway. "Hey Rivera, I wanted to talk to you about something," Robert said. "Sure," James said, assuming it was about a patient. "Look, I don't know how to say this delicately, but people have been talking about you and that volunteer at the community clinic, the artist guy." James felt his body go rigid. "What do you mean talking?" "I mean people know, people have guessed, and some of them are, well, they're not being particularly supportive about it." "I don't care what people think," James said, though his heart was racing. "I know you don't," Robert said carefully, "but I wanted you to know what you're dealing with. The hospital can be a conservative place. There's still a lot of old school thinking here. I'm just saying that it might be worth being careful." After Robert left, James stood in the hallway trying to slow his breathing. He'd known, on some level, that not everyone would be accepting. But being confronted with the reality of prejudice against him and Alex was different than theoretically knowing it existed. That evening he told Alex what Robert had said. "Of course people are talking," Alex said matter-of-factly. "People always talk about things they don't understand. That's not about us, that's about them." "Aren't you mad?" James asked. "A little," Alex admitted. "But I've been out for a long time, James. I've dealt with people's judgment and prejudice and all of it. It sucks, but it doesn't change how I feel about you or about us." "I don't want it to affect my work," James said, anxiety rising. "It won't," Alex said firmly. "You're an excellent doctor, that's not going to change because some people are bigots." But James found himself being careful in ways he hadn't been before. At the hospital he was more professional, more distant. He stopped talking about his personal life. He made sure never to show any overt affection to Alex when they ran into each other at the clinic. Alex noticed immediately. "What's going on?" Alex asked one Saturday after work when James had made sure to keep his distance from Alex all morning. "Nothing's going on," James said. "Don't lie to me," Alex said gently. "You've been distant all morning, you barely looked at me, and I know it's because of what happened at the hospital." "I don't want people making assumptions about my work based on my personal life," James said. "They won't," Alex said. "You don't know that," James countered. "I do know that," Alex said firmly. "What I don't know is why you're ashamed of me." "I'm not ashamed of you," James said immediately. "I'm not ashamed of us." "Then what's this?" Alex gestured between them. "This distance, this treating me like a stranger." "It's protective," James said. It's shame," Alex said, and there was real hurt in his voice. "You're ashamed." "Alex." "No, I'm being serious, James. I can't be with someone who